Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlights series. Today we focus on Benchmark 1.11, defining the rule of law and recognizing its influence on the development of legal, political, and governmental systems in the United States. In Part 1, we will describe the characteristics of a society that operates under the rule of law and the importance of the rule of law protecting citizens from arbitrary and abusive uses of government power. So we'll be looking at these two benchmark clarifications. First, we will compare and contrast the characteristics of a society that operates under the rule of law and one that does not. And then we will assess the importance of the rule of law in protecting citizens from arbitrary and abusive uses of government power. We see these same ideas reflected in our highlights. So first we're going to be looking at this graphic organizer. On the left side, you're going to see a society that operates under the rule of law. On the right side, you're going to see a society that does not operate under the rule of law. What's interesting, and what's very important to our discussion is that societies that do not operate under the rule of law still have laws. The key is how those laws are enforced, and what it means when a law is enforced and what it means when a law is not enforced. So I wanted to point that out, that it's comparing and contrasting what it means when a society operates under the rule of law and another society that includes a rule of law but doesn't operate under it. So looking on the left side, we focus on the idea that first, that government and citizens are accountable to the law. And that accountability is absent from government procedures in a society that does not operate under the rule of law. A government uses fair procedures and due process if that society operates under the rule of law, but there is an absence of fair procedures and due process for a society that does not operate under a rule of law. Looking at these two concepts that we've just identified, focusing on being accountable to the law and government using fair procedures, imagine what it must be like for people if they see that they are being held to a certain standard that other people are not when it comes to being accountable to the law. You might have one person who commits theft of some kind, for example, and another person who also commits theft. One of them is held accountable and one of them is not. If you and I, for example, are required to pay taxes, and some of us pay taxes and some of us do not, but the ones who do not are not held accountable. If it turns out that two people are arrested for committing the same crime, one is guaranteed due process, meaning that they are entitled to know what the charges are against them, and another one is incarcerated without being told the reason. So in those particular scenarios, we have a concern about accountability to the law, as well as an absence of fair procedures and due process. In a society that operates under the rule of law, we also have government decisions that are based on law, but government decisions are arbitrary and inconsistent in a society that does not operate under the rule of law. There is also consistent application of the law, and without operating under the rule of law, the law is applied in an arbitrary and inconsistent manner. So let's look at the two issues that we just focused on in terms of government decisions and the application of the law. Well, imagine if a government decision is based on law, that means that there is a certain precedence that is set, that the government is going to base its decisions on law. That means that if people have a certain set of decisions that they make, such as perhaps buying groceries in the grocery store. That means that if there is an expectation that those groceries be examined and be grown under certain circumstances or manufactured under certain circumstances for our safety, that means that the laws are followed regardless of which grocery store or which store certain items are purchased. But if the government decisions are arbitrary and inconsistent, that means that I could go to the grocery store one week, buy some apples, enjoy the apples, and then it could be that the government did not oversee the growing of the vegetables and to make sure that they were processed appropriately, and then I might get sick as a result of it. There is a consistent application of the law, and that means that if a person is eligible to vote and they register to vote, that every other person who's eligible to vote and decides to register to vote is treated the same way. But imagine if someone goes to register to vote and they're told, you're not eligible, and I don't have to tell you why, right? That's arbitrary and inconsistent. What about laws that are enforced consistently versus laws that are enforced in an arbitrary and inconsistent manner, if those laws are enforced at all? Or government institutions being transparent under the rule of law versus government institutions functioning outside the public view? Well, it's very important that laws be enforced consistently, because that means that that's what we know to expect from the government. So getting back to the voter registration example, if there's a law that says that a U.S. citizen 18 years of age and over, that's a U.S. constitutional amendment, but if the state of Florida decides that every single voter must be registered in order to vote, then that means if somebody is not registered, that they cannot vote on election day. But imagine if a person goes into the polling place on election day and they're not registered, but the poll clerk says, you seem like a nice person, you go ahead and vote even though the law says you can't, right? How could we have confidence in government? How could we have faith in government if the laws were enforced in an arbitrary and inconsistent manner, if at all? And then we focus on government institutions being transparent. We have a right to know what is going on in government. Now, there are going to be concerns about national security, and it's to keep us safe that there might be things that are not made public about things that the government is doing. But what if government institutions function outside the public view? And it's interesting that there are many ways that the government does function in a transparent way. We can, find out information about people who serve in public office. We can attend public meetings. They're called public meetings. We can look at decision making happening right in front of us. In Florida, one of the ways that government institutions are transparent is with something called the Sunshine Law. And the Sunshine Law means that government decisions must be made in public. That means that if members of a city council are going to be deciding on whether or not a certain property could be used for a store or for housing or apartments versus houses, those members of the city council can't sort of meet privately or chat with each other and make a decision privately and then come to the public meeting and then just say, well, we already made a decision. And we're going to tell you that we made a decision in public, but the making of the decision we did without being in front of you. So these characteristics are really very important. So we're now going to look at two quotes, one from Thomas Jefferson and one from James Otis, that focus on assessing the importance of the rule of law in protecting citizens from arbitrary and abusive uses of government power. So with Thomas Jefferson, he says, in questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. In other words, one of the ways that we can keep ourselves from behaving badly is by everyone being held accountable to the Constitution. So instead of having complete confidence in people to do the right thing all the time, we expect them to do the right thing even if they don't want to, if they are all held accountable to the law, or in Jefferson's phrase, by the chains of the Constitution. Let's look at what James Otis has to say. James Otis had an excerpt or a quote that includes a phrase that we're very familiar with, even though we might not have ever heard of James Otis. One of the most essential branches of English liberty is the freedom of one's house. A man's house is his castle, and while he is quiet, he is as well guarded as a prince in his castle. Meaning that in a person's home, the law should protect their home. Protect their home from both the government, unreasonable searches and seizures, and from other individuals from taking things from the home that don't belong to them. And so what James Otis is saying, even the regular person who lives in a regular house, that home is his castle. That home should be protected as much as we would protect a prince in an actual castle. Thank you so much for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? If so, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.